So the tears of angels flowed like little blessings here bestowed upon the lips of the land like fire, an ancient act of desire. So here we are. From an investigative point of view, before traveling to Charlotte, there was an obligation to review all of the information on this case that had already existed, to scrutinize, to study, sifting and deciphering any clues, to determine, first of all, which questions had yet to be raised, and to the extent possible, answer those questions that had already been. The online content and media had to be studied. Interviews of the people involved, the motives should be reconsidered in an attempt to illuminate that which yet may lie hidden still to this very day, just beneath the surface.
Her feet are down at this end and her head is up where your feet are, right here.
Investigators know someone drove the car down the embankment.
You can see where the front wheels of the vehicle were actually in motion.
Her keys were out further uphill and the driver...
Every word deserves parsing, every syllable to be measured. Is body language important? Not sure.
The mystery about what happened to Ira after that has many students feeling uneasy.
But as far as this story goes, there are many characters who, if you'll pardon the expression, come to life as you hear them.
The final closure is whenever the killer's caught, but this will help us a lot.
In many respects, all we can do is listen carefully, as clues may be revealed before our very ears.
They now feel a closeness to the UNC Charlotte student they never knew.
Finding out what a fantastic girl she was, you know. She's a terrific family, terrific friends. I mean, she's loved by everyone.
I haven't seen a picture of her yet where she wasn't smiling.
This cautious listening, except for perhaps the beast among us, comes quite naturally. After all, who doesn't love a film that begins with rain? Rain, decorating a window pane, or darkening a hung-out dress, or streaming down a pouty face. One long, thundering downpour, right through the empty script and score. Before the act, before the blame, before the lens pulls through the frame, to where the woman sits alone beside a silent telephone, or the dress lies ruined on the grass, or she disappears strolling across the overpass. All things flow from that downpour along their fatal watercourse. However bad or way too long, such a film can do no wrong. So when his native twang shows through, or when the boom dips into view, or when her speech starts to betray its adaptation from the play, I think to when we opened cold on that rain-dark night. That neon sign above the drugstore, upon it written a simple score. Forget the ink, forget the milk, forget the blood. All was washed clean with the flood. We rose up from the falling waters, the fallen rain's own sons and daughters. But none of this really matters, does it? Well, the stage is bare and we're here with emptiness all around. But for the voices softly drifting between our ears. Their names are now revealed. But what else? Detective Terry with the Mount Holly Police Department.
When the call came in, it was unclear exactly what was going on. We just knew it was on the river. We headed that way, saw the back of a blue vehicle, and then immediately to the driver's side was the body. There were 3 ligatures wrapped around her neck.
What'd you do?
Well, we initially had to identify her. The knots were so tight that it left imprints in her neck. And then she had a blue ribbon from a small bag that she had in her car. That was tied around and knotted. It was a true, what you call a whodunit.
The man the detective saw said his name was Mark Carver. Said he'd been there with his cousin, Neil Cassidy. They came fishing there all the time.
Never saw her car.
And didn't hear anything.
The fishing area is just through the woods on the other side of these trees. Their DNA matched 2 separate places on the vehicle. It was a very hateful crime.
Ira's brother, Pavel.
There was a police officer. He had sort of a somber look. And then he said, I'm afraid I have some bad news. And he told us that they found my sister. We couldn't believe it. And he said, no, this isn't a mistake. They identified her. Hear one of my parents cry. And that was very different. When something like that happens, somebody ultimately will talk. And so that's what we were hoping would happen.
You'll have no choice but to surrender.
Masha, one of Ira's dearest friends at the university and roommate.
Both our families immigrated here to this country for a better life. There was just so much about her that I've never met in anybody. Just the different combinations of like altruism and it was impossible and humor to not feel like you were the most important thing in the world. I just like started screaming. Sorry.
Ira's ex-boyfriend, Jeremy.
She had left a little like paperclip sculpture of like 2 people like holding hands on top of my calculator, and I just completely fall apart, and it's like you lose all the feeling in your legs, and I'm on the ground and I'm weeping for someone.
The venerable Keith Morrison.
Anybody would have thought Ira must have been killed in a sexual attack or a robbery. But there was no evidence that either of those things had happened. And something else. The car had clearly come hurtling down the embankment, but it crashed into a stump just short of the water. And yet, Ira's body was wet, like she'd been in the river. But how? Why? And had she then crawled or been pulled out? Ira ultimately died here, asphyxiated, clutching the grass beside her car.
You'll recall, it was Neil Cassidy, Mark Carver's cousin, the other fisherman fishing that day, who was also charged with murder. He died the day before his trial was to begin. His daughter, Amy.
He said, if I didn't know what was going on, I would have tried to help her. He actually thought it was kind of cool. He never thought that he would get caught up in like a murder investigation, you know. It's like, yeah, in a couple years, Dad, we're going to be sitting around and I'm going to say, remember the time you were charged with murder? And so that was kind of like a funny moment for us. He was just fishing, that was it. They had told him that they were just excluding everybody that was in the area. And he was like, that's fine, you know. I hugged my dad, told him how much I loved him. And I actually read in the paper that morning about how the trial was starting the next day. He said, I really do hope they find out who killed her. And I guess it must have been an hour or so later. He told my mom to go get his inhaler that he didn't feel like he could breathe. And we thought maybe he was having a panic attack. And we were like, it's okay, Dad, just breathe. And he breathed a couple more times, and then he just fell over. That was it. He didn't breathe anymore after that.
Mark Carver, one of our main characters.
If you can, talk to us about how this whole process began, how this thing led from you going fishing to you being behind bars.
Well, we went fishing, and we was down there and we heard the scream. And the next thing we know, all the stuff started coming. They showed up and they said there was a girl up there and stuff, you know. But we didn't know nothing about her being up there. You know.
What was your first contact with police after that? So you said you heard the scream, but you didn't know those screams.
I didn't hear that scream, I heard scream.
You heard what scream?
Scream.
Okay. And when you heard that, what did you think?
They were scraping the road.
Did you go over to check and see what was happening?
I just kept fishing.
How did you realize something was going on there?
There's a boy on the jet ski started hollering, calling 911. We didn't do it. There ain't no way I done it. I've never seen her before in my life.
If you could say something to this young woman's family right now, what would you say?
I tell them I hate it happening. I want them to catch the right one. I feel sorry for her because I got two more.
Mark Carver's defense team. Lead attorney Brent Ratchford.
He's ready. He's been ready for this day to come. So today's his day in court. Probably the most important week of his life.
Mr. Carver was on disability due to carpal tunnel. Couldn't even pick up a 5-pound weight and hold it. He had so little grip strength in his hands. Now, how can you hold down a young lady, wrap 3 ligatures around her neck when you don't have the grip strength to pick up a 5-pound weight and hold it constantly? These are individuals who had no criminal record. Criminal record, criminal record, criminal record, criminal record.
After Neil Casada's passing the day before his trial was to begin, his attorney, David Phillips, who's now a county judge, joined Brent Ratchford on Mark Carver's legal defense team.
They had no leads. The police were pressured to make an arrest, and they were the scapegoats. They were the scapegoats. And why in the world would Mr. Carver stay there if he had just killed someone? And Mr. Casada had 2 prior heart attacks. We took him down to the crime scene where this took place, and he could hardly make it up the hill without.
One of the lead attorneys prosecuting the case for the state, Stephanie Hamlin.
Working for the state, all you can do is present what you have and what the evidence is. People want to know why.
People want to know.
We want to know why.
Co-counsel in the state's prosecution, Bill Stetzer.
Ira is the type of lady from everybody we talked to that if she encountered 2 scary-looking guys in the woods, she would see her pulling up, getting out of that car and walking over to these 2 strange-looking men and taking a picture of them. or she thought that they didn't see her, taking a picture of them or doing whatever they were doing.
Doing something they weren't supposed to do, we don't know.
And I could see these two guys overreacting. We had a pretty clear sense of who was responsible. They said they didn't hear anything. We weren't going to be able to tell exactly what happened at that scene that day, and juries always want that. So I think we shared a lot of concern. It's obvious that Ira's body is soaking away. We believe that at some point in time, she was put in the river. This was a trial of the conduct of both of these men.
We like to talk to our knowns and then we work our way back in.
By knowns, you mean the things that are easily discernible about a person's life, so you can start eliminating
That's right.
possibilities like boyfriends, for example.
Boyfriends, family, friends.
They just asked me some questions. And of course, like where I was.
He was quickly cleared.
I was in class all day long.
It was the same story all over campus.
We were able to quickly eliminate all of those people. Everyone had proof of where they were that day.
This is high-profile stuff. Was there a lot of pressure?
Oh yeah, lots of pressure. A lot of media attention. You know, we were getting a lot of pressure.
There was a lot of frustration. I know.
He was trying to think of anything in his mind that he could tell them that could maybe help them with a time frame or something like that.
Their timelines were completely wrong. Mark said that Neil rode with him down there. Neil said he drove down there. Mark said he stayed the whole time. Neil said he left shortly thereafter. So everything they were saying were contradictory.
The times changed. What he did not. The order of events never changed.
The times may differ as to what time you got there, as to what time you did this. That's because he doesn't wear a watch.
Everything suddenly was so much alike, it was uncanny.
They now agreed with each other completely.
That's right. They went from the witness pool to the suspect pool.
It was in an interview just after his arrest. He was asked, how tall is Ira?
And he said, she come up to about here on me. And the agent said, well, stand up and show me. And he stood up and said, she come up to about here on me. And then the agent said, well, how would you know that if you hadn't seen her? He said, well, I saw that on TV.
A detective testified Carver knew how tall the woman was.
I believe the words he used was a little thing or a little girl. He said that she came up to him about right here.
And I think I've seen every photograph of Ira Yarmolenko that's been published, and I've certainly seen all the crime scene photos and everything else. And I could not have given you an estimate of how tall she would be up on me.
And he stood up and pointed about right here, which would have made her less than 5 feet tall. She wasn't that tall. He's 5'4". She's 5'3". She would have come up to about here.
He was really sweet. He was kind. He loved to fish. That was one thing that he always did, like all the time. Good men go fishing. If you go fishing, you stay out of trouble. He would always say that. He didn't have to tell me he didn't do it, because I knew him. And I knew that he wasn't capable or something like that. Mark was nice. He always took care of his girls. He was just very soft-spoken and a nice guy.
Neither one of them made
Neither one of them, it made sense. We were shocked. We couldn't believe that it happened.
Families are supposed to love their families, and wives and daughters and mothers are supposed to say good things about their sons and husbands.
There were hours and hours of phone calls. A few of them really made you think, wow.
Like what?
At some point, he was talking to his wife, and he all of a sudden said, Kay, are you mad at me, or are you bad at me for what I've done?
He was just sorry that he wasn't there for us, that we were having to go through this. gone.
And now I've got to go home and plan his funeral. And my world's gone.
It was unbelievable. It took at least a day or so for that to actually sink in.
I was very disappointed, extremely disappointed, because we wanted to have his day in court and we wanted to clear his name, and he never got that opportunity. There's no motive, absolutely no motive whatsoever why they would kill her. There's no sexual assault on Miss Yarmolenko. There's no robbery. There's no larceny of her vehicle. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's consistent with suicide. There's no defensive wounds. There's nothing connected to the body. There's no other evidence that points to any other, really, killer. And that's why they can't find the killer, is because there's not one.
You actually believe she may have succeeded in killing herself?
I do.
The suicide was brought up kind of in passing at the trial. That's not the avenue that we're looking at.
District Attorney Lockbell weighs in on internet sleuths propounding the suicide theory.
Has she read the transcript? Or did she simply take what she saw in about a 20 or 30 minute segment of television and try to reenact it from that? Again, several thousand hours of work versus 20 minutes on a Friday night TV show.
And nearly 3 years after the murder of Ira Yarmolenko, here it was.
The state of North Carolina versus Mark Carver, guilty of first-degree murder. This is your verdict, so say you are. Do you still
Mark Carver, guilty of first-degree murder. Clearly, the jury discounted the suicide theory, just as the police did, considered it physically impossible.
No one could do that to themselves.
Mr. Carver, would you stand, please, sir?
Carver was sentenced on the spot to life in prison.
Sense of just tremendous relief.
And a victory for a young detective in his first big case.
It was a very touching moment, you know, being able to turn around and look at her mom, look at her dad and say, you know, we got him.
It was only truly a legal verdict for Mr. Carver, but the evidence overlapped so much. I think it said both men were guilty.
What trial were you at? Because the evidence was not there.
Mr. Carver is an innocent man, and they convicted an innocent man.
So, in your view, one innocent man is dead, the other innocent man's in prison?
Absolutely.
Nerve-wracking to sit that close to the person responsible for killing my sister.
Those are images you cannot unsee, as they say.
We tried not to look. That was what we desperately tried to do.
You managed not to see any of them?
I sometimes saw things.
Do you still see those things?
I remember it very vividly, yes. We were a musical family, and then it took us a really long time to restart playing music. There's a lot of that sort of recovery that we'll be probably going through for the rest of our lives.
It was hard to sit there and listen to them say that my dad was like this cold-blooded killer and him not being there to be able to defend himself.
And now, Chris Muma of the North Carolina Center for Actual Innocence comments on the strength of the verdict against Mark Carver.
I actually think the DNA wasn't challenged very well at that trial, and that's one of the things we're looking at is how accurate was that DNA evidence, and going deep into the test results and reconsidering that.
They're having to relive the horror And this is very, very sad. There was finality, and all of a sudden there's not finality. And they're having to sit there and listen to someone try to get their family member's murderer off.
When I show up, no, they think I want all the guilty people out of prison, and that's not what we're trying to do.
It does not keep me awake because I know the right man was convicted. The tragedy is not that he is serving life in prison. The tragedy is that she is not alive. The tragedy is that her life was cut short by these two men. That's the sad part, not the fact that the guy who killed her is going to pay for it.
So, there's something called cognitive dissonance, and prosecutors and law enforcement officers, I think, are particularly susceptible to that because they devote their lives to justice, and they have to feel comfortable that they're doing the right thing, that they're serving justice. So that makes it that much harder for them to acknowledge that maybe a mistake was made. So that's why we have to do a very good job of presenting compelling evidence to try and get past that tunnel vision.
There may be another killer.
There could be, yes.
How much more can you say about that at this point? Do you think you could identify somebody else?
That's not what I'm working on. I'm working on determining and proving whether Mark Carver is innocent. Mr. Quesada is deceased. Mark Carver is in prison. And I believe there is evidence that will definitively prove his innocence.
Bell wouldn't comment as to if he would appeal if Carver's conviction is overturned. To say what I would do if something happens, he said, I try never to do that. For WFAE News, I'm Sarah D'Elia in Gaston County.
And as a legal update, Mark Carver's verdict was overturned and he won the opportunity to have a new trial. Mr. Bell indeed appealed that decision. The appeals process is ongoing as we are currently recording.
Attention to detail is everything. See things with a completely open mind. What do we know? What is it we're assuming? Are we assuming she drove herself? Are we assuming she was killed in the driver's seat or passenger? Are we assuming that was where she died and the body wasn't moved? Everything is about how do we know what? How do we know what? How do we know what? It's reasonable to assume that she drove herself there. We don't really know that. So what if somebody else drove her? We assume that she was killed, what, in the driver's seat? We assume that she drove there alone? I mean, how do we know that? How do we know somebody wasn't in the passenger seat? Somebody wasn't in the back seat? How do we know that she wasn't the passenger and that somebody killed her and put her there? How do we know that, how do we know she was killed there? And all of this goes to, is a great, just the best guy in the state. There's a guy named Joe Neff. Well, they did a long series about this whole business about time of death because each element of the investigative process that we've considered lock solid is kind of crumbling.